I was told by Laura that we have this. She just told me that she got some extension, time extension for another like 20 minutes. So we have a floor now for question answer. So you can have a floor, and Mr. Okay, later I'll talk about that. And the floor is open for the answers and question and answer.
वो कश्मीर चला गया वो I have a small question, and which I mean I don't have an expertise in. I have a little bit meteorological, but you know, with the passage of altitude, the temperature goes down, and in the cycle we have snow on the mountains. Okay, when the glacier melts, the next when the winter comes, there will be another snow. As he suggested that because of the carbon, that imbalance will go, or if there are other reasons for the increase of
environment. We think that temperatures in this area, even in the high mountains, are increasing. Okay, so that would logically say we should be seeing more melt. At the moment, it's probable that that's being balanced by the fact that there is more snow. And there is probably more snow because a warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. So in other words, there is more, in the winter there is actually more moisture being brought up, and that is then forming snow. So it's a very delicate balance. So the balance can be lost very easily, and the balance can be lost because the supply of moisture starts to reduce. So if the circulation pattern changes, then we might see a reduction in the amount of snow arriving, in which case we will see glacial retreat. Or it could be that the temperature will get so high that it melts too fast for the snow to replenish. Or it could be that the contaminants on the surface, in other words, the carbon on the surface of the ice, allows more radiation to be absorbed and melting develop. So the fact that the glaciers are not really retreating now shouldn't be any reason to be reassured. I mean, don't get that idea. It's just at the moment the problem is not so acute as in the central part of the Himalayas. We must not assume that means that there is no problem in the future. In fact, there probably is. And the other thing we should be aware of is the fact that ice reflects sunlight. So in other words, when you have snow cover, you expect the temperature to stay lower because a lot of radiation is lost. So what we're seeing in the Arctic summers at the moment is that the loss of sea ice is generating more dark coloured sea, and that's accelerating warming. So the loss of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean is accelerating very dramatically, much faster than the models explain, because of this change in atmospheric absorption. So if we start to see the loss of glaciers, then the process can accelerate very, very quickly. So I mean, really, the key message is the lack of melt glaciers at the moment does not give us an excuse to take no action.
Correct. Just one thing to add, because that's what we were saying, that there is really very fine balance, as David is saying. If we disturb that balance, right? For example, if we generate as a result of this mining and dams, literally, I mean, thousands and thousands of tons of dust, it will deposit somewhere. It will go into the environment. And then these man-made activities, they will cause, of course, carbon emissions. And therefore, the danger is, if we once basically destroy this balance, we do not know the implications. And implications can be really so severe. Say, for example, just one thing to add, that in Sindh there was this 18 years drought, but then there was just one flood, would really uprooted 10 million people. United Nations Secretary General said that this is the worst natural disaster in the history of United Nations. This is the worst disaster if you combine all the three previous worst disasters say in last 10 years. So if it melts, if it is this precipitation, even extreme precipitation, which happened and which brought these floods, and 10 million people, that's 20-25% of the population of Brazil. Still 2 million people are homeless. I mean, in a country, what can you expect to document its people? And then destruction of billions and trillions worth of property, crops, infrastructure, and with this type of governance, how that can be basically reconstructed? It's really very, very dangerous, serious issues.
Mr. Arman.
Yeah, that's a question for Dave. Last year there was an international expert hearing at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Kathmandu on the Indus Basin. And out of 28 experts, 26 were glaciologists and geomorphologists and so on. And they were not very uniform in their assessment of the situation in northern Pakistan or in Pakistan at all. And so there was a big controversy about how to assess the future. And I'm asking you how convinced you are about these climatic modeling you had from the IPCC presented in your talk, how you are convinced, because you are talking there that it is supposed to happen like this. In my understanding, and our institute is contributing to IPCC as well, it is very, very difficult to model climate above 2,000 meters on our Earth, to model climate at all in mountain areas, and the Karakoram Mountains and the Himalayas are the prime example for the difficulties of modeling this. So the question is, how convinced you are about this, and what do you mean by mitigation? What kind of action are you suggesting? Because you twice mentioned now that action has to be taken. What kind of action you're talking about?
Okay, I mean, those are very, very good questions. I mean, you're quite right. Actually, I mean, I said in my presentation that one of the problems that we have with our climate models is that we are really not doing very well at modelling monsoon. Monsoon dynamics are actually very, very difficult to model indeed. And actually, if you look at the model outputs in terms of what the monsoon is expected to do, there is huge variation. And of course that has really big implications for what the climate models say about this area. And most of the climate models in the current generation, in other words the 2007 generation, are actually regional climate models. They don't really downscale to this sort of scale at the moment. So there is really big uncertainty about this. However, actually the IPCC models, the ensemble models, the 24 model basis, is surprisingly consistent in terms of what is expected to happen in terms of temperature in this area. And in terms of precipitation, well, it's less clear, but we do see a clear overall trend at the moment, which is declining precipitation but increasing intensity. So that is about as good as we can do. What it emphasises, of course, is that we must do much better in our research, and that is the bottom line. And it's the reason for creating a network like this is actually a much more coordinated research is very helpful. In terms of mitigation, I am very, very pessimistic about international agreements around climate. I don't think that there is any prospect at the moment of substantial reductions in overall global carbon emissions. It would be great if there was. The likelihood, I think, is really low. There's just too many vested interests. We may reduce the rate of increase, but I don't think we're going to see a reduction. And that means that the overall target of capping the global temperature increase at 2 degrees centigrade is almost certainly now lost, unfortunately, and that's very sad. So, although we should not stop the campaign to reduce carbon use and reliance on carbon, there's all sorts of reasons why we should want to do that. The reality is that in communities that we're actually talking about locally based mitigation in terms of adaptation to likely changes, rather than trying to stop the changes. So in other words, we, as you probably well know, one of the big problems with disaster risk reduction in these high mountain areas is actually people are faced with very rare very big events, like earthquakes, but actually a whole series of big day-to-day issues. And the day-to-day issues are, are you going to be able to feed your family? Do you have access to water? Do you have access to education? Do you have access to health? Do you have access to employment? And really, disaster risk reduction is primarily focused on addressing those key issues. And in doing that, strengthening people's resilience to the rarer events. And that is what I mean, actually.
Just one thing to add, basically what's happening, that our view, and which is quite substantial, that what these development projects are taking place, these are increasing all these risks to the people in that region, in all these areas. Say, risk to their livelihood, risk to their health, risk to their health, education, water, and all that. And that is causing serious risk to all these vectors for the population in that area. And that's a serious issue.
Is there any other question? Okay, so Mr. Noor.
I have one question. When this sudden mudslide happened in this part of Tibet, eastern Tibet, thereafter there were reports that many Chinese scientists, experts, already warned the Chinese government, about the consequences, especially on deforestation. Because in your presentation, this kind of reasoning was not mentioned. So what do you think of that?
You're talking about the landslide that happened last summer. Yeah. In late 2009, I was invited to go and look at that site, at that actual site. In fact, I wasn't able to go, but there was a group of 4 people from the UK, 4 landslide scientists from the UK, who visited that site because it was considered to be such high risk. In fact, on my website, I have some photographs which were taken before the landslide and after, and the before were taken from that visit. So, yeah, I mean, that it was well established that there was a very significant landslide at that location. Of course, the failure is in some way we didn't do a very good job of transferring our understanding of the hazard into a reduction of risk. And this is a really major challenge, actually. In many cases, there is a very poor, although our science is not good enough, there is actually the bigger problem is that the science is not being transferred to end users in a way that's in any way adequate. And that would be something that would be very interesting to explore.
Okay. I have one question in terms of climate change, because I'm worrying after you hear that the temperature is increasing and affecting the climate. But what we are witnessing that the snowfall, like in London, in Florida, most warm places, is quite opposite what we are hearing. So what is the connection between these things?
Okay, I mean, globally we have just seen, it isn't what you observe with your eyes, but if you look at the global temperature record, we've just seen one of the warmest winters globally ever. But what we saw was some small patches where it was unusually cold. And what we mean then is unusually cold in terms of recent years. And in fact, the conditions in the UK, we had a cold December with quite a lot of snow. That actually is a return to the conditions that we had only a couple of maybe three decades ago. So colder than normal, but not actually really exceptional in reality. The spring was then actually not very snowy at all. But you have to understand that there are in the climate system that there are a series of cycles that operate in addition to the overall warming trend. So the overall warming trend can be disrupted for short periods by other cycles. And in the northern hemisphere, a very important one is associated with oscillations in the Atlantic. We call the North Atlantic Oscillation. And the North Atlantic Oscillation is actually, at the moment, is shifting from one mode to another. So the mode we've been in is one in which we would see low snowfall, and we're shifting into one which is associated with higher snowfall. So this is not taking away the overall trend, but it will cause short-term periods in which we will see, for example, we may see more snow in some areas of the Northern Hemisphere. But the overall trend has not gone away, just not gone away at all. All the indicators actually are that the warming is continuing. And I spent a part of our winter in Australia, where they're just dealing with just the most extraordinary drought. So, it's not changing.
My question. To Mr. Professor Devar, after the precipitation emerged from the water when Pakistan and China jointly built 6 mega dams, what kind of consequences do you think or do you suggest?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. I'm not in favour of big dams. Okay, I'm with the last speaker. I mean, big dams to me are not good. And one of the reasons that I'm not in favour of big dams is there is this big problem of unintended consequences, which are essentially impossible to forecast. There is evidence that a big dam has changed rainfall patterns. They certainly significantly change river flow. They're very, very damaging in terms of any migratory animals within fish, for example, within the river. But the implications of them are actually much bigger than that. So there is some scientific evidence that, for example, the construction of the Aswan Dam in Egypt has changed currents, ocean currents in the Atlantic, thousands of kilometres away. And that's because the reduction of the fresh water going into the Mediterranean has changed the Mediterranean circulation, and that's changed the outflow of saline water into the Atlantic. So big dams have big implications over big distances, and we don't need them.
Again, it leads to the same question. Our area is a barren land. The highest mountains are barren. And what will be the consequences after the heavy precipitation which goes into the air? The highest mountain, the barren mountains, there's only soil on the mountains, nothing else, no tree, no grass.
No, I mean, it is a very, very fragile system. It is an incredibly fragile system. So really small changes in the overall dynamics can lead to big changes, much more erosion, for example, or loss of the ecosystems. It's not an area we should be experimenting with.
You should cannot afford.
Mr. Sunday, last question.
No, I just want to add to what David is saying is that Gilgit Baltistan is a high altitude desert. And so it means that when you construct big dams, it increases the humidity level, and that increases rains. So basically in a desert, you should not have rains, which will add to the landslides, and eventually all the topsoil, as you said, will be washed and go into the river. But at the bottom of where the lower riparians are living, what it's going to do, as you said, Aswan, the Indus River, decrease in the Indus of amount of water will lead to the oceanic water coming back into the delta. So the Tata Delta, for instance, it will be submerged into the salt water.
That already has been done.
It has already happened. For instance, we see at Keti Bandar, it used to be a very prosperous port, but now the waters come inland about 3-4 miles, so there is no port there. So that is going to have impact at the beginning of where the dam is going to be, and eventually, millions of people in Indus will be affected. So increased landslides and flash floods in Gilgit Baltistan impacting the local people, but at the same time, it will impact the people further down.
Okay, so I think we are almost time is coming to an end. So I will just ask Mr. Noor if he has to say something.
Sorry, I just want very briefly, of course, initially, UNB would like to thank, the rich panelists who came here today to really, inform us about the bigger issues
involved, for the survival of the people in Gilgit Baltistan. I think this is very important. Then very briefly, while discussing these issues, when my friend from Sindh, he was talking about the Indus River, then I just wrote a note, then you can see how Sindh, Ladakh, Gilgit Baltistan are related to Tibet. Because the water origin is
From Tibet, that's correct.
so which means some people might say, but why are you a member of UNPO with these groups? But then in reality, we also have a connection there. This also brings to my mind the Tibetan plateau, which now the scientists, many scientists, call as the third pole, which is the roof, of our people. If the environment, if a major collapse happens, then what will be the consequences?
That's correct.
The issues we are discussing, there is glacier melting going on in the Himalayas. There are glacier lakes already there. There are mudslides, earthquake, desertification, deforestation, dams, mining. Everything is happening there under the misguided policies of the Chinese authorities. This, I think, when you, or like, the people of, the Chittagong Hill Tract people in Bangladesh, Brahmaputra, we are UNPO members, again we are connected to that way. So I think I feel that in the future we should discuss this, at a broader level. Maybe, with all the affected UNPO members, and maybe others also, due to this kind of misguided government policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your participation and the great discussion and rich contribution made by your speakers, scholars, enlightened, us sensitized, new, kind of opinion, which I think especially the region which was under discussion lacks understanding about these very crucial issues which are seriously impacting the livelihood of the people there, and the responses, the trends and the intentions of the governments, whether it is China or it is Pakistan, needs to be examined, needs to be debated, because they are not supposed to undertake any major mega projects in those areas which are constitutionally, legally are not part of those countries, which are disputed and recognized international disputes, and as China, Pakistan itself calls these areas disputed parts. But when we examine their practices in those areas are completely opposite what they claim internationally. And similarly, Mr. Harman has probably had some reservation in terms of the Chinese presence in Gilgit Baltistan and Pakistan and Mr. Kashmir, but I also mentioned in my brief introduction. And as a resident of that area, as a son of soil, I will get in touch with my own people here, friends here, those are working on that issues in that area, and we have a feedback from the ground, And even I have read some statement from Pakistani officials that the PLA troops are there to help the people. They haven't said that those are the engineers or those are the civil contractors, but they are there to help the flood victims and for the reconstruction purposes. So we are not against the development. We are not against the cooperation among the governments. We are not against the peace. We are not against the resolution of the conflict. But we want that the involvement of those disputed people, the leadership, and the communities is important when you are taking any initiative in terms of the development, in terms of you are doing development for who? For the local people. If they are not on the board, I mean, you have people on the board, you are nominating them as a probably chief minister, like you have people in Baltistan nominating as a chief minister, but you don't like the Sardars, those are not, I mean, cooperating with you, but rest of the, I mean, you are not against the rest of the Sardars because they are cooperating with the military institutions there. So we need to understand that wherever they are undertaking any kind of a projects, whether it is Gilgit Baltistan, it is Pakistan administered Kashmir, or any other area where, I mean, people are not involved, where that local government is not involved, how that local government is involved, that look at the infrastructure, political setup they have created, like the Northern Areas Council and the Kashmir Council. That controls all the powers, and all the powers are exercised by the Prime Minister of the Pakistan in the name of the Kashmir Council and in the name of the Northern Gilgit Baltistan Council, new creation now. And out of 56 subjects of Azad Kashmir, 52 subjects are under the Kashmir Council, and Muzaffarabad has been rendered as a non-entity in local administration. And even local administration is in the hands of the Chief Secretary, Pakistani National, Finance Secretary, Pakistani National, Inspector General, Pakistani National, Accountant General, Pakistani National, and all the projects, I mean the dams and the mega projects are, I mean, carried out without the consent of the local, I mean, agreement. The people in the Mirpur protested, people in the Gilgit Baltistan protested against that. But the problem is this, what we are here to generate some sort of a discussion that the development is not a top to the bottom. Okay, development is the bottom to the top to involve the local communities. It is for the local people. It is for the local, it is for the empowerment of the people. It is to build the capacity of the people. It is, I mean, for the political emancipation. It's kind of, it's a participatory approach. It's not like you are excluding the people. You are not. It's not an inclusive approach. So that's what this whole conference was about. And I think most of the contribution made by our, I mean, panelists was a great input and enlightened us. And we hope that your cooperation is important to us because we are resourceless. We don't have resources to, I mean, produce some sort of, I mean, document which could, I mean, influence or pressure the Pakistani government or the Chinese government to behave, I mean, responsibly. They should, I mean, the socially responsible, I mean, projects are, I mean, welcome, that empower the local, I mean, people here. We are not against that. But what I would suggest over panelists, that whatever your, I mean, your studies are, whatever you think, because those areas and those people, let me be honest, like the Pakistani or Mr. Kashmir, I was talking to Mr. Arman, that we don't have any research on any kind of, I mean, subject. After the 2005, probably some international NGOs have done some studies. So we are very poor in terms of resources, and the government are not interested. Islamabad is not interested because you know the military has no, doesn't want any kind of democratization and involvement of the people and all these things. So you should, guide us, help us, and whatever you can do, in your capacity, that will help us to involve the international community, to mobilize the international opinion that could force them so that in the local people should be on the board, whatever policies they are making towards that area. So I would also ask you whatever your presentation, graphic or verbal, where if they are available online, so just give us your links so that we can produce a paper later on. That will help us. So you have contact number of the
We will publish a book. We will publish a book.
Abdullah Khan. So that's what I meant. The second, I have two announcements. One I already asked for this presentation, and the second for the dinner will be, I think, Radisson Hotel, right? Radisson Hotel, just next to the European Parliament, right? Just next to the European Parliament, and it is almost now 7 o'clock, and we will go together there for the dinner. And once again, thank you very much on behalf of UNPO and Baltistan National Fund, and congratulations both of you holding such a great, discussion and discourse. And thanks again.
Thank you.